Qing's prose on husband and wife quarrel. Recently, I often quarrel over friends and couples, and I am busy being the peacemaker. As usual, the woman came to tell me angrily, pointing with tears, "Look, he came to argue with me again yesterday morning, saying why he didn't mend the hole in the heel of his stocking. In fact, the hole was a very small piece of wood. It's so small that you can't tell when you put on your leather shoes. I know it's because I woke up the child early in the morning that he couldn't sleep comfortably, so he came to me to make trouble. But didn't I also feel uncomfortable sleeping? Who told him to come back in the middle of the night? I can't live like this anymore." She wiped away her tears and said firmly, "It's better if we all get divorced." After listening to this, I didn't reply for a moment. I first raised my eyes and looked at her whole body. Is her hair just oiled? Is the shade of makeup just right? Do you still have everything you need when selling handkerchiefs? If these answers are all positive, then I have a way to deal with it. To deal with someone who is very angry, you can only pretend to be serious and listen to her sympathetically. It is best to remain silent, except for nodding slightly from time to time. And you must be careful not to speak when trying to persuade someone. But how to deal with this kind of people who are only 70% angry? Just use Boko's method of teasing, pointing to the watch on her wrist, etc. Zuzu asked if this was his recent birthday gift to her. How about walking fast or slow? Made in that country? Have the long and short needles ever caught each other? Then we will discuss whether the style of women's watches is rectangular and beautiful, and whether round or oval is fashionable, etc. Of course, she didn't have the heart to answer at first, but since I asked such a long list of questions, she was too embarrassed not to answer perfunctorily. Gradually, she remembered the astonishingly high price of this watch, and her face suddenly showed a proud look, and she asked me if I would buy one as well. He had a cousin who was a deputy in a watch company, and he would definitely not suffer any loss if he was asked to buy it. In this way, from the matter of buying the watch to the person who bought the watch, it is inevitable to retell the story of yesterday morning's quarrel. But this time there was no trembling voice. Although I still wipe my eyes from time to time, there are no tear stains on the handkerchief. Only some rouge has been wiped off. As for what he just said about why he blamed her for not patching up the holes in her socks, he added a lot of comments one after another, to the effect that although you don't have to do it yourself, you still have to inform Ma Chen that you are a housewife. I can't escape the responsibility of giving orders. Naturally, I understand her identity. She is not someone who does lowly tasks like mending socks, and her husband will never dare to question her about this. As for her husband, how could he submit to that pair of torn socks? Although the cave is very small, therefore, her note too is, "Did you know that yesterday morning it was so gloomy that it looked like it was going to rain?" He was afraid that the American tiger leather shoes were unreliable, would leak. So he was busy taking off his thin woolen socks and replacing them with a pair of gauze socks. But his fine gauze socks had been tied up and put in the big cupboard by Chen Mai. This pair with holes was placed outside. They were deliberately given to Chen Ma's nephew and brother. She was here. I regretted everything I told me in anger, so I quickly distracted myself with something else, and we all talked randomly for a while. Finally, I asked her, "So, did he come back early last night?" This reminded her of her memory. It turned out that there was another thing she hadn't told me. She had a quarrel and went to her parents' house with the baby in her arms. So I don't know what will happen to him in the future. After I asked this question, her expression became obviously uneasy. She was worried that after she ran out, he might actually go out and dance wildly. So I knew that the time had come to discuss specific measures. I first defended and explained on his behalf, then sent her a few minor complaints, and finally expressed my opinion. I'm not afraid that he will be anxious. For the sake of the child, I have to go home. Although she was still shouting reluctantly at that time, her expression seemed to have already agreed with my principle of going back. But what about the way to go back? Could it be that he ran out on his own and came to the door again the next day? She was clearly troubled. I decided not to go back, she murmured repeatedly. I decided not to go back. I know the rest of this sentence, which should be, unless he comes to his mother to accompany me in person. So I guarantee that he is absolutely willing. In this way, after she leaves, I will make a phone call to invite her man. I didn't tell him the reason why I invited him here, and he didn't ask me. Everyone should be aware of it. I started to calculate the time. From the time between the phone call and his arrival at my house, I could gauge his eagerness for peace. I told him that his wife had been here just now. He pretended not to care. I asked him how to resolve this matter, and he said that it didn't matter whether it was resolved or not. She could come when she was happy, and pull her down if she wasn't happy. Family is meaningless. Besides, I didn't ask her to come by at that time, he repeated. Now she will come if she wants to come, or pull her down if she doesn't. I don't care at all. On this occasion, I knew that everything was settled, so I stopped discussing it. We talked about other things, and agreed to go back to his house to find him this week. I didn't tell him the reason why I wanted to find him, and he didn't ask me. Everyone was still very upset. On the appointed day, I invited 3, 4, 5 friends to go with me. The elephant forced him to go to Yu's house to marry his wife, and the matter was over. However, having said that, this is entirely our responsibility and Shiruo's. As for whether they can reconcile as before, it depends on whether a third party will come back to hinder them. When couples quarrel, they're most afraid of a third party being caught in the middle. Not to mention being caught in the middle. Standing in front of them is also the main reason for the situation to escalate. In the first half of many couples' quarrels, the quarrel may be about the thing they are fighting about. In the second half, it is usually because of the presence of a third person. Everyone has to continue to quarrel in order to regain face, hoping to seize the last sentence as a glorious victory. Symbols of. I once recommended a very diligent maid to my cousin's family, but they fired her within 2 months. My cousin felt sorry for this and came over to explain to me. That girl, the maid's work is very to my liking, and your cousin-in-law really likes her. But one thing is bad. That is, since she came to work, your cousin-in-law is afraid that she will tell you all about our occasional quarrels. Therefore, every time I made a slight criticism, I would cry and make a fuss, saying that I was deliberately trying to make her look bad and make fun of her. And she had to ask me to say good things to her in front of my aunt. I really couldn't stand this kind of trouble. We also felt that it was unjust to spend so much time on her, so we decided to leave her alone and call her at the recommendation shop. This way, your cousin would occasionally say something to me, and we would not be afraid of being laughed at by relatives. I believe in my cousin. To tell the truth, a wife is often only willing to wipe her husband's back quietly in the room, and is not willing to wring a handkerchief in front of everyone for a man who has just come home in the summer and is so tired and sweaty. This is a new style woman's concept of face. If her husband can understand her, the family will be peaceful. Furthermore, you can take advantage of her mentality and threaten to shout so loudly that others will hear you during a private quarrel. At that time, your wife will be afraid of losing face, and her anger will turn into a coward. Women love to show off in front of others. She can be patient because she is afraid that a third party will hear her, or she can be stubborn to the end because of the presence of a third party. As for men, most people are always angry, and Cheng Yaojin's 3 axes are powerful. As long as wives can keep in mind the old saying, a good man never suffers immediate losses, deal with it calmly, and dodge at the beginning to avoid the attack, you can come up with your killer in the future. And generally speaking, the more aggressive a person is, the faster he will give up the fight card. As a wife, you should understand this. Face is all behind, and you can use outsmarting rather than fighting with force. Female generals are not allowed to use that kind of black whirlwind strategy. If they immediately become angry when they hear an evil sound, pick up an axe and rush back indiscriminately. However, if she is really as shy as a virgin at the top and would be devastated by a lion's roar, then there is no harm in doing so. In short, if the east wind overwhelms the west wind, or the west wind overwhelms the east wind, between husband and wife, quarrels will always be unavoidable. The winner and loser during a quarrel depends on the one who can know oneself and the enemy better. There is one more thing I would like to ask wives to note. 36. As a last resort, escaping back to your parents' home is absolutely unacceptable too. In today's era of the small family system, the pressure of evil mothers-in-law and tricky girls can no longer be placed on brides. When he got up, the mother-in-law attacked her uncle with great potential. Although men were more tolerant, they would sometimes follow the example, especially if the mother-in-law is a widowed mother-in-law and an only daughter of 2 wives. Her expression of reluctance when she returns home after the full moon will make you feel uncomfortable. My son, chew a few more mouthfuls to moisten your throat. That's a good thing your brother recently brought. Tremella fungus, eating it will nourish you. You two are just sharing a floor outside now, and you can show off together. Auntie Yin is too busy cooking and boiling water, so I have time to prepare some supplements for you. You are very thin, uncle. Why don't you stay still? No matter you curse secretly in your heart. Since the old woman can't let go of her daughter, why don't you hide at home and enjoy happiness for the rest of her life? What's the point of marrying a pauper like me? The mother-in-law just keeps saying. When her father was alive, there were some winds that he couldn't bear to let her blow. Although she is less fortunate now, she is lucky to have enough food at home. And I still make her fat every year. It's ready-made, and I'm afraid she'll be tired even if I'm in bed. Now that I'm renting a house outside, I have to take care of everything myself. Even though I have an aunt after hearing this, my wife seemed to become even more pampered, and simply called Tremella. It's too sweet to taste, so I need to eat some snacks from Wei. Her mother tilted her head and thought for a long time. This is not good. And that is not good. It makes you impatient and just want to leave, while your mother-in-law is staying for dinner again. I see that you newcomers don't have any other rules. Your parents-in-law live separately. Who dares to gossip? Son, you two can just spend the night here after dinner. The bed in the east wing has just been made. No matter how good-tempered I was at that time, I couldn't help but get angry, and said to my beloved wife with a stern face, since my mother-in-law insists on staying, you can stay here for a few more days. I have to go to the scriptorium tomorrow. I can't put it off any longer. If it doesn't matter if you go to the scriptorium, I'll ask you to go there tomorrow morning. Besides, they don't have a stove in their room, so it will be deserted when they go back at night. Although she said this, she thought she was out of concern. And you sounded as if you were laughing at Qiangquo's appearance. So you stood up angrily and grabbed your hat, and then stopped her mother with a strong voice. Mom, if he wants to go, just let him go. It's so serious. At 9 o'clock, you have to go to the office. If you can't bear to flirt with your beloved wife, you have to put down your hat and sit down silently and listen to her mother and daughter chatting about their daily life. You didn't understand anything and had no interest in it, but you had to endure it until the dead of night, when you stood yawning repeatedly and were sent to the east wing to sleep. Many son-in-law hate their mother-in-law to the bone. If the wife jumps on the tram and goes back to her parents' home when they have a quarrel, the men will immediately think of their mother-in-law's usual instigation, and even suspect that this quarrel was prearranged by the mother and daughter. Conspiracy. At that time, if the mother-in-law still didn't know what was going on, instead of being able to avoid suspicion, she would instead gather her children and nephews to investigate the crime, based on her beloved daughter's words, and things would become tense. It should be noted that if a man is frightened by his wife's words, he will be intimidated by his wife alone. There is no need to mobilize people. Otherwise, although a man with a little self-respect can succumb to his wife's coquettishness, he will never be able to do so. He bowed his head and listened carefully before his brother-in-law Taishan Taishui invited someone. If a couple's quarrel reaches this level, the inner rift between them will never be healed. Young couples, please don't underestimate that little quarrel. But if there is no spark, it can start a prairie fire. I often wonder why gum cavities in their families occur in early winter instead of one after another. After several field visits, I suddenly realized that the crux of the problem was that the wife was concentrating on knitting sweaters. I know that with very few exceptions, there is no man who doesn't like to have his wife sit with him and talk when he comes home. His wife should be more concerned about everything about him, at least in terms of words, and it is unacceptable to look indifferent. However, 9 of the 10 women love wool, and the 4 knitting needles are busy all day long. Vests, shirts, gloves, and stockings are wear upon one after another. The new ones are tied and the old ones are quickly taken apart. Heavy knots fall off, resulting in lint balls on the bookshelves at home, lint balls on the bed blanket, and lint balls rolling around everywhere. This is enough to make men upset when they see it. Not to mention the eyes of their wives. Her hands are all busy with the wool. You tell her that the money order has shrunk, but ignore it. Tell her that a new book has been published, and she counts her stitches even more nonchalantly, counting her stitches, dozens of stitches, and hundreds of stitches. In this way, the husband will not want to run out, and he will definitely cause something to cause a big fuss. Another thing that can easily increase the risk of quarrels is that when men choose a mate, they often like to choose an innocent and lively woman, but after they get married, they regret that innocence is useless. It turns out that the innocent heart is like this, willful and random, a wife who only knows herself, but not others, especially when life is difficult, has a wife who knows better than others. An incomprehensible and inconsiderate wife can cause her husband mental pain, which is far greater than all other material hardships. Above it, therefore, a gentleman is more important than starting with caution.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.